Paul, a 10-year-old boy, was sent to his auntie Janet's house for the holidays. His parents thought it would be a great opportunity for him to experience life in the city and bond with his aunt, but little did they know the horrors that awaited him. Janet, who was Lucy's younger sister, appeared warm and kind on the surface. She welcomed Paul with open arms, promising to take good care of him. However, beneath her facade lurked a darkness that would soon turn Paul's life into a nightmare. Paul's first few days at Janet's house were uneventful. He spent his time playing with Janet's children and helping her with minor chores. However, as days turned into weeks, Janet's demeanor began to change. She started calling him into her room late at night under the pretense of needing help with something. Initially, Paul didn't suspect anything sinister. After all, she was his beloved aunt, someone he trusted implicitly. One fateful night, Janet called Paul into her room. She told him she wanted to teach him how to be a man. Paul, confused and frightened, didn't understand what she meant. Janet's tone was commanding, and her actions were far from the care and affection he had grown to associate with her. Overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, Paul complied, and that night marked the beginning of a series of abuses that would scar him for life. Janet manipulated Paul into silence, threatening him with dire consequences if he ever spoke to anyone about what was happening. She used her authority and his young age against him, ensuring that he felt powerless and trapped. Despite his growing discomfort and fear, Paul didn't dare defy her. He thought about telling his parents, but the fear of not being believed or being punished kept him silent. As weeks passed, Paul's health began to deteriorate. He became withdrawn and avoided playing with other children. He started having frequent fevers and unexplained weight loss. Janet noticed the changes but ignored them, continuing to abuse him without remorse. Eventually, Paul fell seriously ill. Janet, fearing exposure, decided to send him back to the village. She told him that if he ever mentioned her name or revealed what had happened, she would make sure he suffered even more. When Paul returned home, his mother, Lucy, was shocked to see the state he was in. Instead of showing concern, Lucy jumped to conclusions. She accused Paul of being wayward and irresponsible. "What have you done to yourself?" she yelled. "I sent you to the city to learn and grow, not to come back with a disease." Paul's attempts to explain were met with harsh words and punishment. Lucy's anger blinded her to her son's pain, and her refusal to listen only deepened his despair. Paul's father, though initially disappointed, began to suspect that there was more to the story. Unlike Lucy, he noticed the fear in Paul's eyes whenever Janet's name was mentioned. He tried to ask Paul what had happened, but Paul remained silent, terrified of Janet's threats. Meanwhile, the villagers began gossiping about Paul. They mocked him, calling him names and ridiculing his condition. "Look at him," they would say. "What kind of boy brings shame to his family like this?" The constant judgment and lack of support pushed Paul further into isolation. John, Janet's husband, had always been a perceptive man. He noticed that Janet was unusually nervous and evasive whenever Paul's name came up. Sensing that something was amiss, he decided to investigate. He began by talking to Lucy and Paul's father, expressing his concerns. "Paul was a lively boy before he came to our house," he said. "Something must have happened to him. We need to find out what." John's persistence eventually led him back to the village, where he sat down with Paul. "Paul," he said gently, "you can trust me. I'm here to help you. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." At first, Paul refused to speak. Janet's threats echoed in his mind, paralyzing him with fear. But John's kindness and reassurance slowly began to break down his walls. One evening, after much coaxing, Paul finally opened up. Through tears, he recounted the horrors he had endured at Janet's hands. John was horrified. He couldn't believe that his own wife had committed such heinous acts. Determined to seek justice for Paul, he immediately reported Janet to the police. The law enforcement agencies acted swiftly, arresting Janet and launching a thorough investigation. The truth came to light, and Janet was sentenced to life imprisonment for her crimes. Meanwhile, Paul's health continued to decline. Tests revealed that he had contracted HIV/AIDS as a result of the abuse. The news devastated his family, especially Lucy, who realized the grave mistake she had made in not listening to her son. Overwhelmed with guilt, she broke down in tears. "I have failed you, my son," she cried. "Please forgive me." Paul's father took charge, ensuring that Paul received the medical care and support he needed. Human rights agencies stepped in, providing therapy and counseling to help Paul cope with the trauma. They also worked with the family to create a supportive environment for his recovery. With time and effort, Paul began to heal, both physically and emotionally. John, though heartbroken by Janet's actions, remained a pillar of support for Paul. He encouraged him to pursue his education and follow his dreams. "You are stronger than this," he told Paul. "Don't let what happened define you." Inspired by John's words, Paul worked hard to rebuild his life. He excelled in school and eventually became a passionate advocate for children's rights. As an adult, Paul dedicated his life to fighting against child abuse and raising awareness about HIV/AIDS. He established a foundation that provided support and resources for victims of abuse, ensuring that no child would have to suffer in silence as he did. Paul's story became a beacon of hope, inspiring others to speak out and seek help. But Paul's journey wasn't without challenges. Rebuilding his life required facing the emotional scars left by Janet's abuse. Through therapy, he uncovered his strength and resilience, learning to channel his pain into purpose. Over the years, Paul encountered other survivors, each with their own harrowing stories. He used his foundation to amplify their voices, creating platforms where victims could share their experiences and find solace in knowing they were not alone. Paul's advocacy brought him into the spotlight. He collaborated with international organizations, pushing for stronger child protection laws and better healthcare access for HIV-positive individuals. He traveled the world, sharing his story at conferences and seminars. Each speech he delivered resonated deeply with audiences, shedding light on the often overlooked realities of child abuse and its long-term effects. Lucy, too, found redemption in her son's mission. She became an outspoken advocate for parental awareness, urging families to listen to their children and prioritize their well-being. Her transformation inspired many parents to reevaluate their relationships with their children, fostering environments where trust and communication thrived. Meanwhile, John's role as a mentor to Paul expanded. He became a key figure in the foundation, leveraging his experience to provide guidance and support to other survivors. His unwavering dedication to justice earned him widespread respect and admiration. Together, John and Paul spearheaded campaigns that led to significant policy changes, ensuring that perpetrators like Janet faced the full weight of the law.